And by the way, I am very much so a First Amendment person. I'm 100% behind somebody peacefully going out and protesting and standing up for what they believe in. But as soon as you start trespassing on somebody else's life, liberty, or property, that's the line that's crossed. And to be okay with individuals going in and doing this is just disgusting. It doesn't teach anybody a lesson.
I mean, it teaches society a lesson that you can trample on other people's life, liberty, and property as long as you have a Democrat governor who will refuse to do anything about it. That's the only lesson it teaches. It's shameful. And I mean, as you were saying, I'm fundamentally a First Amendment guy too. In 2020, I was out protesting the lockdowns. And by the way, the governor threatened to jail me for doing that as well. And then he simultaneously participated in a Black Lives Matter riot. So, you know, there's a bit of a viewpoint discrimination there. And a federal court took notice of that as well.
I think we all, unfortunately, remember back in COVID, the lockdowns, the shutdowns, not being able to, well, at least the government telling us not going to church. This guy right here, state representative in Kentucky, went up against the governor, sued him, and won. TJ Roberts with us today. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on, Isaiah.
Tell us about the story about you were in church and how that whole process went down.
Absolutely. So I've been a born-again Christian since I was quite young, heavily involved in youth ministry, was a volunteer at my home church. 2020 comes around and churches are taking precautions, but fortunately I was still able to find places to go and worship the Lord. And then on Good Friday of 2020, it was April 10th, the governor of Kentucky, who ran on this Mr. Rogers style moderate position, standing with the full force of government behind him, said if you are caught at church on Easter Sunday, that he is going to have the Kentucky State Police take down your license plate and put a prosecution notice on your windshield, indicating that your license plate has been taken down, you have been identified. We're going to make it that your license plate, your private information, your address, everything is subject to the Open Records Act. So that way left-wing COVID Karens can dox you. And that you have two choices. Your first choice is serve 2 weeks of what he called quarantine, which I prefer to call house arrest. And by the way, this house arrest order applied not only to me, but it applied to my family that I lived with. Or serve 1 year in jail for violating the governor's emergency order. Needless to say, I believe that they were more intense in Andy Beshear's Kentucky was more intense than California in the early days. It was egregious. And by the way, the governor of Kentucky modeled his lockdown order off of the Rhino governor of Ohio's lockdown order. But even the Rhino governor of Ohio said that nothing in this order shall be construed to disparage activities protected by the First Amendment. So churchgoers had the legal right to go if they could find a church that was open in Ohio. They took that provision out in Kentucky. But there was a list of exceptions. You could go to Walmart, you could go to the airport, you could go to corporate meeting centers, you could go to your office, you could go to pretty much any secular entity as long as they were multi-million-dollar entities that donated to Andy Beshear in 2019. But you couldn't go to church, you couldn't go to a mom and pop shop, you couldn't keep your own small business alive. And look, I was against the lockdowns even in March 2020. There was this meme that went viral where it's the founding fathers debating on the Constitution, and it just says, well, none of this counts if people get sick, right? I was the one that made that meme.
Oh, really?
So yes, that was me. So I was very anti-lockdown from the get-go. That being said, whenever it came to active resistance and a willingness to go to jail, if that is what it came down to, it's my faith. It's those matters of eternity, right? I'm called to follow the laws of God, not the laws of man. And I decided to follow my faith, and I attended church on Easter Sunday. By the way, these left-wing thugs scattered nails and glass shards across the driveway of this church. in order to try to physically stop us from entering. Um, it was outrageous, and this continued. I come out, I find that prosecution notice, word for word, what the governor said it would do. The doxing threat was in there. The requirements that my family comply with house arrest was in there. The threat of jail time was in there. And I decided to contact an attorney, Chris Wiest, who is now my boss, by the way. And I sued the governor in federal court. And interestingly, we lost at the district court level. And that was the moment that I really got to that point of like, I might actually go to jail for going to church. We might actually be at that point where the government is once again persecuting Christians. And not just in the secretive way that they do it, like how Wisconsin denies tax exempt status to Christian ministries and charities because they serve members who are not of the faith, which is something we're called to do as Christians. But overtly, you're at church on the holiest day of our calendar. We're going to put you in jail for doing it. So we appeal, and luckily on appeal, the Sixth Circuit unanimously struck down Andy Beshear's church ban. And I think that the unanimous court put it best. All we wanted was to be treated differently. And was to be treated the same. We want to be treated equally. We weren't asking for exemptions of social distancing requirements. If they said you guys just need to stay 6 feet apart, you need to have a lower capacity limit than the fire code usually has you do, we were ready to comply with all of that. But we basically just wanted to be treated like Walmart. We wanted to be treated the way that Andy Beshear's special interests were treated, because they got special treatment. We just wanted to be treated as well as they were being treated. Fortunately, the Sixth Circuit saw that plainly, struck down the order, and that was the case that really took off on anti-lockdown litigation. Neil Gorsuch cited to it in Arizona versus Mayorkas, saying that what Andy Beshear did was, and to quote him, one of the greatest violations of civil liberties in our nation's peacetime history. And he's not wrong. And Thank goodness it got to the point that we got binding case law that really put to bed this rank targeting of Christians in America.
It was absolutely awful, but I didn't hear it being that bad there. I mean, here they had a list that you would submit to the state that, I think so-and-so's has a gathering more than 10 or 12 people, and you would go online and report. And what they didn't realize, and I was one of the people who did this, was you could actually FOIA all of the Karens. So it was like what you said, but in reverse. You could find out who all the Karens in your community were and who they were reporting. And you were able to get that list down, but there were no like stickers that they stuck on your car or anything like that. And I certainly didn't hear about glass or nails or anything like that being put in church parking lots. That's insane.
Yeah, it really was one of those eras of mass hysteria. Look, Andy Beshear has this cult of personality. I mean, these people, they worship him. Andy Beshear fundamentally rules like a godless leader who believes there is no higher power than him. And that is why it was so bad in Kentucky. And we can just think about this. The governor of Kentucky in November 2020, when we knew these lockdowns aren't working, COVID's not that dangerous, it's not killing young people, the elderly are actually quite resilient around it if they don't have a comorbidity. So we knew at this point this was pretty much a flu outbreak. Nevertheless, he reinitiates a lockdown again that, by the way, targeted Christians. They made it to where individuals in Christian schools were shut down, but yet they could go to secular daycare. That was a serious issue. But also, he specifically targeted an individual who, before I became a state representative, was a client of mine, Andrew Cooperrider, the owner of a coffee shop called Brood. He was vocally against the lockdowns with me back in the day, and he said that he's not going to comply with these lockdowns. And he criticized the governor's way of doing things. The governor on television said he's going to make sure that Andrew Cooperrider never does business in Kentucky ever again. And so we sued the governor in his individual capacity for First Amendment retaliation. Because, by the way, every single person who disobeyed the COVID lockdown orders of 2020. They've all moved on. They've all moved on. It is this one politically motivated hatchet job that is still ongoing. And by the way, as part of the Kentucky General Assembly, I'm honored to say in 2021, we passed a budget restriction saying that the governor cannot use state funds to pursue further COVID enforcement orders. We recodified that in our 2022 to 2023 budget. We recodified it in our current budget. I'm confident we're going to recodify it in our 2026 budget. And
so this
yet
is still
the
something
governor
that's going on.
Yes, the governor is still maliciously targeting a business owner for refusing to shut down and for criticizing him on the internet.
Wow. What a petty man.
It's an act of generosity to call Andy Beshear a man.
So in 2025, he's going after somebody for being mean to him on the internet.
Yes, and by the way, we got to win. So there's ethical constraints on what I can and cannot pursue. I can still represent my client in the circuit courts of the state courts on the effort to permanently revoke his license to sell food or liquor. And we got to win. We won in the Fayette Circuit on the grounds that my client complied with the statute that we provided in 2021 that grants immunity to businesses that comply with the least restrictive means for public safety. He was complying with those. So he's able to reopen, and they're still denying him a liquor license. They're still denying him the ability to do business. And it's all politics. We know it's politics. And in fact, a federal court in the Sixth Circuit comprised of Republican and Democrat judges unanimously held that the governor's retaliatory actions against my client was grounds to deny him qualified immunity. I can't be on that case now because I can't sue a state agent for damages as a legislator, but it's being litigated by my employer now. I'm screened off of it. But that said, we are still fighting to get him his license back in state court, and it's currently in the Court of Appeals. The governor's people appealed the county level decision saying he's entitled to get his license back. It's outrageous. And by the way, your taxes are paying for this, even though we have passed 3 budget bills that says no more, not one more penny toward the enforcement of this nonsensical crap. And it's still happening in Kentucky.
How can they still be doing it if you've codified the prohibition of using funds for that purpose?
Well, the governor is actually notorious for doing this in Kentucky, where he uses tax dollars for purposes that we have not authorized. He violates budget restrictions all the time. He doesn't think the legislature is legitimate. By the way, if you want an idea of how twisted Andy Beshear's logic is, we put in a budget restriction that says Medicaid funds cannot go toward the mutilation of humans in the name of transgenderism. That was easily passed. It passed 80 to 20, something along those lines in the House and 32 to 6 in the Senate. So it was an easy bill to pass. The governor vetoes it, and I had the honor of voting for the bill twice because we overrode his veto. And then he says that he's not going to enforce this law because we can't afford to. We're not telling him to spend money. We're telling him not to spend money. So he can afford to do things that we never made appropriations for, but he can't afford to not spend money somehow.
So what do you
we
do
have
in
a tyrant
situation?
Well, for me, I'm exploring Section 88 of the Kentucky Constitution, which authorizes us to impeach him. I think at this point, the governor has made clear that his last 2 years in office, he is going to act as though the legislature does not exist, and that if the court rules against him, he's going to act as though they don't exist. That he believes that he is the judge, jury, executioner, lawmaker, law interpreter, and law executor. He's only one of those. He's the law executor. We write the law. And frankly, if we get to a point to where the General Assembly may as well not exist because this governor refuses to enforce the law, I will file and force a vote on impeaching him.
What does that look like in Kentucky?
So in Kentucky, we have a simple majority for the House, and then we have 2/3 for conviction in the Senate. It's identical to the process at the federal level. And by the way, we have those margins in Kentucky. Our majority in Kentucky is not even close. Right now, the legislative majority in the House is 80-20, and the legislative majority in the Senate is 32-6. So the votes are there, but I'm waiting to see if he's actually going to follow through on these threats. I don't want to impeach someone just over threats. I want to impeach someone if they actually refuse to carry out the law.
And that's fair. That's absolutely fair. But I mean, at least you already have him, though, on spending money that he's barred from spending in pursuit of prosecuting those who he disagrees with. I mean, you have him on
Absolutely.
that, it sounds like.
We absolutely have him on that, and it's shameful, and I'd like to see action taken on that. I'm weighing our options. We have him on so much more. He used over $80,000 of our tax dollars to go to Davos to rub shoulders with the world elites at the World Economic Forum. So I mean, that is the real nature of the governor of Kentucky.
And this guy's looking to be president.
Well, there is no doubt in my mind that Andy Beshear has been running for president ever since he was denied the spot as Kamala Harris's VP. No doubt in my mind. He wanted with nothing more to be the vice president. He was so desperate for that. He went to an Iowa for Kamala Harris rally, middle of the road, moderate Iowa, and at it, he photographs himself holding up a baby onesie that he autographed that says Pride Baby. He decided he wanted to advertise sexuality on a baby. Look, I don't care what you do in your own bedroom as a consenting human adult, but when we're talking about children here, I don't care if it's straight, if it's gay, whatever. You don't sexualize babies. You just don't do that.
These people are absolutely weird, man. I don't get that at all. I don't get that at all. So what do you think that you like? So you're looking at impeachment, obviously, and as we look at the possibility of COVID moving forward and what we've seen and experienced already, what can legislatures do to be more proactive to stopping governors from going off the rails like this? What are some things that people should be looking out for? I can think, for example, in Virginia, one of the things that we did, and I think this is one of the dumbest things we did, is we delegated the authority of whether masks should be in school or not based off of federal policy. And at that point, it was the Biden administration, and Republicans agreed with this, which I completely disagreed with delegating the authority there, but they thought for whatever reason that would expedite getting masks out of school. It didn't. Surprise. What are some things we should be looking at to reform, change that are common in multiple state legislatures that can be weaponized again in the future that we should be on the lookout for and should advocate the change?
So one of the first things that you should look at, and this has mostly been taken care of, but there's still more improvements to be made. Look at what the statutes say, or the Constitution says, for your state about emergency response. Our emergency response statute is KRS 39A, which before COVID, we had a major natural disaster and the governor was not in the Commonwealth. And the problem was no one was able to really use the state power to respond to the natural disaster. And we heavily overreacted. This was a century ago. And we gave the governor borderline unilateral authority, the ability to suspend statutes, the ability to make expenditures that we haven't otherwise authorized because it's an emergency. And we're a part-time legislature, so there has to be something in between the time. So I'm out of session until January, right? So if something drastic were to happen, the way that the law currently stands, the governor has $3 billion for disaster response. The governor has 30 days to respond to that emergency. And for suspension of statutes, he has to go to the attorney general as well. There has to be concurrence between the two, which is a separate elected office. He doesn't appoint the attorney general in Kentucky. So we put up significant guardrails in 2021. I would like to see that 30-day response time limited down to 14 days Because when you're talking about closing down businesses like the governor did, 30 days can be make or break. 14 days can be make or break. But 14 days just makes more sense. And in those 30 days, if the governor does not call a special session of the legislature to contemplate renewal of an emergency, it automatically ends. So he only has 30 days for an emergency. I think that's sensible. Again, I'd prefer 14. Interestingly enough, the clock is ticking on multiple state level emergencies that we've had. Since we went out of session, Kentucky's been devastated by floods and tornadoes across the Commonwealth, and it's been disastrous. I mean, we have lost good Kentuckians as a result of this, and my heart goes out to them. But that's showing sort of the balance that we have made, right? The world didn't fall apart just because we limited the governor's powers on that. So those are some things I would look to. There's other things that you can look to in substance, which I think is important as well. But I think procedure is much more important because good procedure tends to result in good substance. So one example, we passed a law as well that just said, no matter what the emergency is, so long as any secular institution is open, you are not allowed to close churches down. So if you're closing churches, that better mean Walmart is closed too. Everything has to be closed at that point. I think that's a brilliant substantive thing. So adopting laws that just says conduct typically protected under the First Amendment shall not be trampled on in emergencies. That's a good policy to do. We used to, so one substantive protection that we did as well, we made it to where the governor cannot shut down gun stores. They cannot take away firearms for emergency response as well. That's a good thing to add in. I mean, especially in Democrat states, I know you might have a bit of an uphill battle in the legislature, but that's a good thing to do. But ultimately as well, I reject the notion that the legislature is always the answer to the problems in emergencies. One of the best things anyone can do is just making sure that they are rooted in a united community that takes care of each other so you don't have a need for big government when the going gets tough, right? And why do we have so many social welfare programs? We've lost faith. We've lost families. Used to, if you came into hard times, you went to your family first to see if they could help you out. If they were not able, you went to your church, and churches almost always took care of that. But as we've lost faith over time, people's first resort is to go to government to fix their problems. And I can tell you, as part of the government, I'm 1/100th of 1/2 of 1/3 of Kentucky's government, and I am not the answer to all of your problems. My goal is to get the government out of your way, so that way you can take care of yourself and your family and those you care about. So
I would argue
a lot
that
of it
was the church that it was those who were faith people who delegated the authority to the government rather than the church, and that's what caused the leaving of the faith. If you look back over the last 4 decades, it's the constant let's send it to the government. I don't personally want to do that. Let's have somebody else do it. Has put us where we are now. I do genuinely believe that.
It's certainly happened in modern progressive Christianity, and it's a disaster. We need to return back to the scripture. We need to return back to the tradition of our fathers, and we need to really get back to doing what we're called to do and taking care of one another. And and that's the thing. Think about how many churches just went along with the lockdowns, didn't speak up,
sickening.
Didn't try to find alternatives. They just shut down. I was blessed to find a church that was in open defiance that still had in-person worship service. That was still an 1.5-hour drive for me. I still did it because it was worthwhile to me. It was a matter of my faith, and I would absolutely do it again. There's no distance that would have kept me from it. There were people who came all the way from Connecticut for that Easter Sunday service.
It's just wild times. And I hope we never get to see that again. Just wild.
Absolutely.
I still can't believe that they did. I just still thinking about the nails and the glass in the parking lot. Like, what awful people. Speaking of awful people and the riots in LA, what's your take on what's going on there in California?
Look, California is fundamentally a different nation at this point because we have imported a brand new voting base there, and they outwardly support illegal immigration. But the reality is they are under America's jurisdiction. And if you come here illegally, you have committed a crime, you should be deported. And I 100% stand with what ICE was doing. I 100% stand with President Trump addressing these riots, because the reality is this: we are a nation of law and order. We will not tolerate riots, even if Gavin Newsom and the mayor of LA is doing everything they can to let people destroy mom and pop shops. All I'm going to say in terms of this, though, the people of LA need to look back to their history, because it's all fun and games until the roof starts speaking Korean.
Oof. Fair point.
But I mean, but it's a serious point too. It's a serious point too. I mean, let's be level here. When government refuses to protect the public safety of people, people are going to take their safety into their own hands as well. And I'm sorry, but I have no sympathy for anyone who is out rioting and looting and just stealing from their neighbors in order to express their dissatisfaction with the government, which may demonstrate that this has nothing to do with it may have nothing to do with political philosophy. I doubt these guys have political philosophy. I've never seen them loot a Barnes and Noble. Maybe they would have a greater understanding of what's going on if they did. Not saying they should, but they should buy the books instead. But let's be level here. We are at a point where California is so lawless that if they were not under the jurisdiction of the United States, you would be on your own in California. And it's disgusting to see these people try to condemn President Trump for keeping his promise to defend law and order in the United States. And by the way, one of those people is my governor, Andy Beshear, signing on to a letter condemning the president's response to these unconscionable riots.
Ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. And it seems like every time Trump is a president, you have people who are stealing and looting. You have these riots, and you have a virus. And I'm not that guy. I'll put it out there about the, it's in foil, but it seems like that's their only response that they have. It's okay. We're all going to go to the streets. And by the way, I am very much so a First Amendment person. I'm 100% behind somebody peacefully going out and protesting and standing up for what they believe in. But as soon as you start trespassing on somebody else's life, liberty, or property, that's the line that's crossed. And to be okay with individuals going in and doing this is just disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. It doesn't teach anybody a lesson.
No, absolutely. I mean, it teaches society a lesson that you can trample on other people's life, liberty, and property as long as you have a Democrat governor who will refuse to do anything about it. That's the only lesson it teaches. It's shameful. And I mean, as you were saying, I'm fundamentally a First Amendment guy too. In 2020, I was out protesting the lockdowns. And by the way, the governor threatened to jail me for doing that as well. And then he simultaneously participated in a Black Lives Matter riot. So, there's a bit of a viewpoint discrimination there, and a federal court took notice of that as well.
It's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. But I appreciate folks like you who are in office, who are actually like one of the good guys. And so I appreciate that a ton. Thank you very much for your time today and for what you do. It's very thankful for folks like you.
Absolutely. Thank you.